Hey, what's up, guys? My name's Chase Gabriel. Most of you watching this video right now don't know me, and that's okay. That's not what's important. But what is important is the reason why I'm here. And the reason why I'm here is because I have a real, raw, relevant, and relational story regarding the drug epidemic going on in the world today. And through telling my story, hopefully inspire others, bring hope to the hopeless, and maybe touch that one person that feels like they're in the deepest, darkest pit of their life and they can't get out. Don't give up. Don't give up, because if you give up now, you're never going to know what it feels like to get out. But if you scratch and claw little by little each day, eventually you'll get to the top. And that's what we all want, to be at the top. You may be sitting there asking yourself, well, how do you know? You've never been through it. I have been through it. For 7 years, drugs had a hold on my life, and I was in that deep, dark pit. For 7 years, drugs affected every decision I made on a daily basis in a negative way. Pain pills, to be exact. It's taken me a long time to get the courage and the strength to actually sit down and tell my story and not be ashamed of my past, but actually use it for something good. And that's why I'm here. You know, when the number one leading cause of accidental death in the world is due to fentanyl overdose, that's even more reason for people like me that have a past and have a story of getting through it to the other side to come forward and help those that are maybe going through it now or maybe faced with that decision later down the road. You know, having kids and raising kids in the world today, it is scary because, you know, I got a son and a daughter. My son is getting ready to turn 12 years old. In just a few short years, he's going to be a teenager in high school. And I'm sure 3 or 4 years down the road, the drug epidemic is going to be even worse than it is today. And it's going to take people like me and other people that have been down that road and made it to the other side to come forward and give them the knowledge and the experiences that we've had that affected our life negatively, to hopefully steer them from not going down that road. You know, I battled with drug addiction for almost 7 years, and growing up in the early to mid 90s into the early 2000s, drugs were nowhere near as prevalent then as they are today. Every time you turn on the news in the world today, whether it's morning, noon, or night, there's a new statistic about drug overdoses or you know, fentanyl, heroin, meth, whatever it may be. And I can see where it is tempting for the younger generation, or not even the younger generation, for people in general that have never, you know, experimented with drugs or tried drugs to want to see what it's all about, because the people that are producing these drugs in mass quantities are making it more eye appealing. You know, the last time I turned on the news, there was pills that were actually fentanyl pills that looked like candy. And it is nerve-wracking and scary as a parent to know that stuff's out there. But if I can make a difference through my story and save one life or many lives, you know, it would be worth telling my story, and that's why I'm here. You know, I'm 34 years old. I'm a husband. I'm a father. I've been married to my wife. We've been together almost 15 years. We got a 12-year-old son and a 6-year-old daughter, and life's pretty good. We live in a beautiful house. We both drive nice vehicles. But that wasn't always the case. 5, 6 years ago, things were a lot different. You know, I was a drug addict, and life wasn't always this easy. But it's possible to make the change, and I did. It wasn't easy, but if you want it bad enough and are willing to put in the work and the effort, you can make it to the other side. See, I knew nothing about drugs, addiction, anything along those lines growing up as a kid. You know, drugs were never in the picture. It wasn't until 2008, when I'm an 18-year-old kid, I have a knee reconstruction and the doctor prescribed pain pills. The doctor did nothing wrong. The doctor did his job, and I did what I was supposed to do. Starting out, I took pills as prescribed and didn't think anything about it. At the time, I knew nothing about addiction and was the furthest thing from my mind. And for about 8 or 9 months, I took pain pills. And, after the script run out, the doctor took me off the pills, and for about a week, 2 week time frame, there was a period where, I just didn't feel 100%. Didn't know if I was sick or what it was. Looking back at what I know now, my body was going through withdrawal. I didn't want to be addicted to them, but my body became dependent on them because I was taking so many for such a long stretch of time. And 8 or 9 months might not seem like a long time, but anybody that's been addicted to drinking, tobacco, drugs, or even caffeine for that matter, you do something long enough, your body becomes dependent on it. And so I get through that time frame, and life pretty much goes back to normal. I was working, me and my wife had just got our first house together, and everything seemed pretty good. And kind of right there, that same time frame, my parents were going through a divorce, and after being together for 20 some years, they decided to separate. And I told myself, and I pretty much told everybody else, it didn't really affect me, and I, at the time, I didn't think that it did, but I was searching for something to fill a hole or a void inside, or mask the pain and emotion of dealing with basically your family separating, and so I resorted to pills, and bought some pills off an individual I knew at the time as what I called recreational use. And at first, that's what it started out as, 1 or 2 a week. Then it became 1 or 2 a day, and before you know it, it seemed like every night it was 10 a day. And for the next 2 to 3, 4 years, drugs were an everyday occurrence in my day-to-day life. And at first I hit it very, very well, I think. Me and my wife have often talked that if somebody has an addiction problem and can support their habit financially, you can hide it for quite some time. But it isn't till the money, if you will, runs out, and you got to resort to doing other things to support your habit, is when questions start arising. And that's pretty much what happened with me. Right around 2011, I'm a couple years into the pill addiction, and my son's born, and so now it's not just me and my wife. We got a newborn child, and I got to support 3 people, and just a lot of other things going on. So the money to go towards the drugs isn't as prevalent as it was in the past. So at this point, that's when the lying and the stealing and the cheating start to creep in, and pretty much turned me into a person that I never would have imagined that I would have been. I was a raging drug addict at this point. Anybody or anything that stood in my way of me getting my next fix, it didn't matter. I was going to do whatever I had to do to financially support my habit. And that lasted for for 3 or 4 years. I would lie to my wife. I would lie to family, friends, any way I could to get money. And if I couldn't get it through them, then I would resort to stealing or whatever. And that's when it started to affect complete strangers. There was not going to really get into the details of the stories, but I heard a lot of people that didn't know me from Adam, but I may have stole something or whatever it was to financially support my habit. And at this point in time, my family didn't really know a whole lot about the addiction side of things. It was still pretty new, but they knew I had a problem. And I remember being at home one day, and pretty much everybody in my close family circle showed up at the house, and basically had a family intervention, if you will, and told me that I needed to go get help. And I knew I needed help. I knew I had a problem, but I wasn't necessarily ready to quit for myself. I was just basically tired of listening to all their bullshit. So I agreed to go get help. And what that consisted of was basically going and talking to a counselor on a regular basis. They thought that going and talking about my problems would help, and it did to a certain extent. But after 6-8 months of doing that, and not doing drugs every day, in my mind, I felt like I had control over the problem. So what did I do? I resorted back to drugs and picked them back up. And honestly, that was probably the worst decision that I ever could have made. I was already 6-8 months clean and went through the withdrawals and stuff. And when I was going through that at the time, I said, never again. I'd never do it again. Well, what did I do? I picked it back up. So this is my second go round, and it's tenfold worse than it was the first time. Few reasons. My tolerance level's higher, even though I'm 6-8 months drug free. My tolerance level was still higher. And I knew I had heat on my back from my family. And so over the next couple years, I turned into the worst monster that nobody wanted to be around. I was a liar, I was a thief, cheat, whatever you want to say. I was it. I was the scum of the earth. And I got a wife and kid at home. My son at the time, he's 5-6 years old, and instead of being at home wanting to spend time with them, I'm out trying to scheme up how I'm going to support a drug habit. And at the time, I was working for a family business, and made some decisions, and did some things that ultimately led to my wife just in family, close family that mattered, basically saying, you got two choices. You either go get help, or you're not going to have a family anymore. But at this point, my wife's ready to leave. We just found out she's pregnant with our second child, our daughter. And I was doing nothing but negatively impacting our family. I was spending more time on chasing drugs and figuring out how I was going to get drugs than I was actually working and trying to support our family. And I remember coming home one afternoon with I was supposed to be at work, and if I'm being 100% honest, I was out chasing drugs, trying to figure out where I was going to get my next fix, so I didn't have to feel like shit. At this point, it wasn't even about the high anymore. It was about just functioning and being able to get through the day. I hadn't really experienced high on drugs in quite some time at this point, because my drug use and tolerance was so high that I was just trying to survive. And I remember pulling in the driveway, and there was a couple suitcases sitting right there at the bottom of our steps at the front door. And I remember my wife, she was waiting for me. She come outside and handed me a piece of paper, and it had a phone number on it. And I remember her telling me, if you want to have a family, or if you ever want to see your unborn daughter, you're going to call this number and get some help. And me being the drug addict, it was always everybody else's problem, not mine. So I instantly start giving pushback. And I had no intentions on calling that number. I remember putting my bags in my truck and backing out of my driveway and driving away, and had no idea where I was going or what lied ahead. All I knew is, I remember thinking in my head, everything that I had ever wanted or cared about in the rearview mirror, I felt like I'd lost everything. And I remember picking up my phone, and I called the phone number on that paper, and a gentleman answered the phone, and I introduced myself, and I remember him saying, "Chase, brother," he said, "Man, we've been waiting on you to call." He said, "Your wife had called us a few weeks ago and got things set up, and he said she really loves you, brother. He said she wants you to get help, and she wants her husband back." And at that point in time, I felt like there was a house that was lifted off my shoulders, but I was still scared to death. There was a lot of unknowns that lied ahead, but I knew I was headed in the right direction. So the following morning, I remember my wife meeting me at a detox and recovery center here in Columbus that she had set up for me to go to. And I remember her walking in with me and telling me, if you go through this and get the help that you need, she said, we'll be there when you get back. And those words were reassuring, but I was still scared. I had never been to jail in my life. There's a lot of times I probably should have been. But I remember walking through that door, and when that door shut behind me at the recovery center, that was the closest thing I could relate to jail. I felt like, even though she told me they were going to be there when I got back, that everything that I had ever wanted, I had just pissed down the drain. So I remember going into the detox center, and at this point, I'm about 24 hours into no drugs in my system. So, the withdrawal and the emotions are really ramped up at this point. And I remember there's several people in there, and everybody was just like me. They all had the look on their face of, oh shit, we fucked up. And I remember there was people in there that had been there 2 or 3 times, people 4 or 5 times. There was several people in there that had been there 6 or 7 times. And I remember thinking in my mind, I'm thinking, man, you've been here 6 or 7 times and you still haven't made a change. What the fuck am I doing here? This isn't going to work for me. But I knew that if I didn't follow through with what was in front of me and commit to making the change, it wasn't going to matter, because nothing that I loved or cared about was going to be at home when I got back, if I ever got back, because the road that I was going down was either incarcerated or dead, to be quite honest with you. And a lot of that's why I'm here telling my story now, is because there are several times along that addiction road that I could have easily been in jail or dead, and I'm not. And I feel like that's a big reason why I'm here today, is because I was supposed to get through it, and I was supposed to tell my story to help others either overcome it or not go down that road, period. And so I committed to staying there and getting the help that I needed. And I remember a couple days into being at the facility, I meet an individual, one of the counselors there, by the name of Raphael. And I don't remember Raphael's last name, but if you're ever watching this, Raphael, the discussion that we had that day was a turning point in my life, if I'm being quite honest. I remember talking to you and asking for advice, and telling you I'm ready to be done. I'm tired of looking over my shoulder, and I'm tired of telling lies to cover up other lies. And I remember he looked at me and he asked me where I was at with my faith. And I believed in God or higher power, whatever your belief is. And growing up as a kid, we went to church a few times, but it wasn't something that was a regular thing in my life. So I had zero relationship with God at this point. And I remember Raphael, telling me, he said, man, if you're 100% ready to make a change, he said, all you got to do is ask God to come into your life. And he said, he'll begin to work on you, and don't ever look back. And he said, he won't let you down. And I remember he asked if he could pray for me, and he put his hand on my shoulder, and for about 5 minutes just prayed. And later that night, I was laying in bed there, and I'm not quite sure if I had a Bible or I had some type of book. And one of the first scriptures that I read was Jeremiah 33:3. And it said, call unto me, and I will show you great and mighty things that you don't know. And basically what that said to me was, I've tried it my way, and look at where it's got me. Why don't you try it my way and see what happens? And so I remember I put the book down, and I just laid there in silence. And in my head, I talked to God. And I said, God, if you're real and everything that I'm being told is true, and all I got to do is submit to you and give you my problems, and you'll help me turn my life around, then that's what I'm willing to do. Because I've tried it my way, and it's got me nowhere. I've about lost my wife. I've about lost my kids. I've pretty much lost anybody or anyone that I care about in this world. So I'm ready to try it your way. And I remember that night, anybody that's ever asked God into their life or said a prayer, asking God to work on them, might know what I'm talking about. I had heard people talk about it in the past, but never really experienced it. But I had the most warm, peace feeling that just took over my body. And, even though I was going through withdrawal and feeling like complete shit, that I had, almost lost everything and that I had ever cared about, I slept better that night than I had slept in years. And I remember when I woke up the next morning, I felt better than I'd felt in a long time, even though I'm 4 or 5 days fresh into putting drugs down, I felt like, and I knew there was hope, because I hadn't felt that feeling in a long time, if ever. If it'll work for me, it'll work for you. I was slated to go to a 30-day rehab program when I left the detox facility, and I did. I went for one day, and in the first 24 hours, something inside me just kept saying, I met 2 or 3 guys that were there that they were like, man, this is our second or third time here. Some of them were there on their own will. Some of them were, forced to be there, legal reasons or what have you. But, I just kept telling myself, well, if they've been here 2 or 3 times and all they're doing is going through the motions and it hasn't worked for them, then why is it going to work for me? Something kept telling me, if I'll follow God and listen to what he has to say, anything's possible. So I left the 30-day rehab in the first 24 hours. And I'm not sitting here encouraging anybody to do that. I'm not sitting here encouraging anybody that's in a rehab program or considering going to one not to go, because they do great things there. And some people need that. Some people need that encouragement, and they need to be in a safe environment to where drugs aren't tempting. And looking back, if I would have stayed there, it would have been, I would have learned and done great things. But at the point in time, I didn't feel that that's what I ultimately needed to overcome my addiction. And it necessarily wasn't. Even though I was a drug addict, I knew right from wrong. But when you're in the middle of a drug addiction, even though there was several times that I knew what I was doing was wrong, but I still continued to do it because I was trying to support a habit. And I was a person then that I never thought that I would be. And so after leaving the drug rehab facility, within the first 24 hours, I remember calling my wife and telling her that I left the rehab facility, and obviously only being 5, 6, 7 days clean out of drugs, she's not receptive whatsoever. And I understood that. I knew when I made the phone call to tell her that I left the rehab facility that she was not going to be receptive of it. But something inside me told me that was what I needed to do. And I remember a few short weeks later, we attended a church here in Central Ohio for a 2 to 3 year time period that basically turned my life around in a positive direction. My relationship with God was great. I would say better than it ever had been, but I'd never had a relationship with God. I knew who he was, and I thought he was real, but until he started showing me things that I didn't think were possible, it wasn't till then that I realized he was real. And if I continued to do the things that he was asking me to do, that the great things would come. And this was early 2017. I was clean from drugs. Our second child, our daughter, was born, and life was good. I had a good, steady job, and we were on a road that we hadn't been on for quite some time. And my relationship with my wife and my family, it took several months, and I had to to make a lot of amends. Some I never got to make just because people completely, wrote me off, and I respect their decision for that. And it was 2018, so about 2 years after, I'm 2 years into being completely clean off of drugs and working a good job at the time. And I remember coming home from work one day and telling my wife that, I want to do something for myself. I'm tired of working for someone else. I'm tired of being on somebody else's schedule. So in return, I started a business, and I've ran that business for the last 4 or 5 years. It's doing well into the 6 figures a year, and everything's been great. It's allowed us to buy a house that never would have been possible. It allowed us to buy vehicles and have things that being on the drug addiction road I would have never been able to do or have the things that I have right now. And over the last 6-8 months, it's kind of been a roller coaster as far as work and trying to keep the business going, and I've set several days and hours, still feeling there's a void inside on what my real purpose is in life. And it's one thing to go out here and make money and have good business and all that's great, but I was still left wondering if that's what I was meant to do. And after talking with my wife and thinking long and hard about it, I really feel like what my purpose is to tell my story and do something to help others that are going through it, or that may go through it in the future, to show them that it is possible to get through the other side. And no matter how bad that it gets, or when you think that there's no help for you, not to give up. And that's what I want to do. That's what I'm passionate about. I enjoy talking to people when I don't know everything, and I don't have a whole lot of advice to give on a lot of things in life. But when somebody comes to me, and I just talked to an individual a few days ago that was asking how I did some things and how I got through it, and there's nothing that brings me more joy than to trying to help somebody or give advice. And that's what I want to focus on from this point forward, is tell the world my story and hopefully inspire others to do the same, or give a little glimmer of light to that one person that feels like they're in that deep dark hole with no end in sight. And that's what I'm committed to do. And I'm here today to let you know that when you think that no matter how hard you scratch and claw to get out, you're not making any progress, don't give up. Because if you give up, you're never going to know what it feels like to get out. I'm living proof of it. There's a lot of times that I shouldn't be here right now, but I am. And I feel like the reason I'm here is to help you or help others. So anyone that feels like they don't want to keep going, or they want to give up, all you got to do is ask. Ask God for help. Lay all your problems and baggage down at Him. He did it for me, and He can do it for you. If you got any questions or need advice, or if there's just need somebody to talk to, don't be afraid to reach out. My name is Chase Gabriel. Anything's possible if you want it bad enough.